Hey guys, welcome back. I know it has been a minute. Welcome back to the channel. If you are new to this, I have recently kind of rebranded. So we are calling this channel now Phase the Future. So we can phase it out, we can face it together, right? And that's what we are here to do. Today's video is all about the eclipse on December 4th. It's December 3rd, 4th. It's straddling midnight, basically. And so we're going to be already feeling this. Eclipses are magnified energy, right? So we can feel them like a week in advance, maybe even farther than that, and on the other side of it as well. And so these are pronounced energies, almost like portals, so to speak, where you're just kind of seeing change on a magnified level. They're happening all the time, and so they're not unfamiliar to us, but depending on how significant it is, where it happens in your chart, and what signs you have major placements in, your sun, moon, or rising, when those are in an eclipse sign, these are those windows where you really get to make the most use out of it and get closer to your destiny, which is all about the eclipse points of the north and south nodes. So if you are a Gemini or Sagittarius, sun, moon, or rising, this will be particularly important for you as we are closing out with this eclipse the axis that Gemini and Sagittarius has been on for us, ruling the eclipses for the last year and a half. And so it's been a major player in the life of COVID and trying to get us more mobile and allowing us to learn, I think, a lot more about ourselves. Gemini and Sagittarius have that in common, right? It's all education, information based, and it wants to share. And so we've been kind of challenged with new ways of how to share information, how to connect with people, maybe in ways that we haven't before, right? And so this is going to be kind of like a weird overview. I really don't know how this is going to go because this Sagittarius energy is so big. I have a really hard time kind of almost structuring it. It's so expansive. If you think about the energy as, the Greek gods sitting up in heaven, and how, it's overseeing so much. And this is the the lead into making this video. I've gone in so many different directions because with in particular, we're going to focus on mythology. It's so expansive and it's not precisely defined, like where you find a story here and you'll find it over here. And there are going to be some details that are not exact, and how they're presented, who's there, what they embody. And so part of all of this, even part of astrology, is to fill in those gaps, to fill in those imperfections where you're not finding that pure consistency. There's a lot of consistency because over the decades and the centuries, we've been breathing more and more life and truth into these stories. But the more and more we kind of take them on, the more we kind of distort them a little bit from what they really were to begin with. And so there's kind of like both sides of it, right? But mythology has been an undertaking for me this year in particular, just on a personal level and embodying it into my work more fully in astrology. And so I'm very passionate about this video. And so just bear with me. Let's see where we end up going together on this eclipse journey. So get comfortable if you're not already. I am kind of, in my own personal life, I'm breathing new life into all of my platforms, changing them in different ways. I've had some weird instances, and that last eclipse in Taurus really set this off for me, this transformational time and phase. And so you guys are seeing me literally go through these changes in between the eclipse windows, and to see kind of what that looks like. And I think it's really interesting. It's not, I think we can get overwhelmed with like, ooh, we're in between eclipses. What does that mean? But I think in a lot of ways it's more rare, than just your average transit or your retrogrades that are happening all the time. And so think of it that way. Think about like, ooh, this is a really interesting 2 weeks from the lunar eclipse we just had in Taurus now to the total solar eclipse we're having in Sagittarius. Really, really interesting stuff, right? So let's get into it. So where to begin? Since this is heavily mythological, we are going to start with the story, but first with just some factual information about this eclipse. So the reason why I said it's the 3rd and the 4th is because depending on your time zone, it may be in the very early hours of December 4th, Saturday, or it may be in the very, very late hours of Friday, December 3rd, but we're already in the eclipse energy. We get this sense that bigger things are happening. Perhaps you're already in the excitement, in the changes, and you're just like, whoa, things are pretty major right now in my life, shifting for better or for worse. I think we're always a little more fortunate in Sagittarius season when we get an eclipse or a transit. There is more favor happening during this time. And so always if you're concerned about how it's going to hit you, try to think of it that way. Keep it in the context of like what the actual time that we're in astrologically, even if it's just as simple as what season are we in. So, so anything that happens around this time is trying to push us higher, right? Think about that. And in particular, since this eclipse is happening at 12 degrees Sagittarius, this is major. We really need to understand, to know, to experience fire energy, what this eclipse is, to really take it farther, to elevate what it's doing to us around this time, right? And so just think about that. You have to live it, you have to experience it personally on a personal level to understand how to then share it, how to then put it out into the world, right? And so that's kind of what we're doing. We're taking what's happening and we're maximizing its impact by connecting it with other people, other experiences. Just think about how social media is doing that so much. We can give this like window into our lives, right? So I do want to point out this is a total solar eclipse. So when you think about solar eclipses can only happen when it's a new moon. And so the sun, the solar energy is getting eclipsed by the moon. So I think Heroes is probably the best show or example that comes to mind that has this major solar eclipse event. At the very beginning, I think in the first episode where everybody's powers are kind of activated, so to speak. So the moon will be moving in front of the sun for a very brief moment. And in some parts of the world, they will get that image where the sun is blackened and all you can see is the moon's face with just these little solar flares kind of happening around it. And so it's always a sight to see. Eclipses have been captivating cultures for millennia now. The ancients have always looked to the sky for answers and guidance. And we're doing that. We're doing that in such a cool way nowadays. It's a lot more accessible and easy to kind of access. Now it's on our phones. Now it's like in our minds. It's not something we have to wait, to happen. We can kind of peek into it before it happens. But think about that. Think about the sun being blocked out for, even if it's just a few moments, what that means. The sun is the life giver. The sun is solar energy, is brightness, it is truth, it is, and so its existence itself only occurs when there is a central star or a sun to radiate its heat, its warmth, and to keep everything in its alignment, in its orbit. And so it's kind of the I guess in some ways it's the key, but it's the central thing that holds it all together, right? The sun is at the center of our cosmos, or at least our part of the world, the galaxy, the universe. And so just think about that. When it is darkened for a second, what that can implicate for us, you know? When we are activating both the light and the dark simultaneously, when the moon and the sun join each other, that's what's happening, because the moon is a reflective body, and so it needs other light to be able to show itself. Otherwise, it's in the dark, right? Doesn't appear to us. And so when these two come together, we are combining solar and lunar light. And what that means is the combination of yourself is being combined. You know, so your sun in your chart is what you're here to do. It's the character, the stage, it's what lights you up, it's what inspires you, it's what challenges you, but in a good way. And then the moon is your internal, your past, you know, your emotions, the things that have happened that you do know and are familiar with. And so when those things line up, we get this activation of new experiences, locking things in for ourselves. Because it's like the sun is always trying to prove itself and is very encouraged to see what's out there. But when the moon is a part of this, then we also feel like we've made enough room in our past, in our bodies, in ourselves, that we feel encouraged to go out and do things, right? And so that's kind of what it is. So that's a major, just think about the visual of that and what that could mean for you. You know, things can go dark for a second, but we have, you know, major light being revealed right after that. And so sometimes we have to have that kind of moment of like, oh man, this is like really, really intense. So, and then not knowing is the best way to ensure that you are going to find something out right away, you know, or after. So, because everything works, you know, in duality. And duality is something that we're definitely going to see in this eclipse. So, bear with me, you guys. I don't know how long this is going to be, and my sinuses are crazy today. My nose has been running, and luckily it's stopping for this video. So I guess I need to get this out here. So let's start with the mythological story of Hercules. So what you'll find a lot, the reason why Hercules has to do with this eclipse at 12 degrees Sagittarius is where we find Draco the dragon, the constellation up in the sky, which is right next to Heracles. And even though Heracles didn't meet a dragon named Draco in mythology that we know of, he has a huge labor, you know, he has a huge story with defeating a dragon, spoiler alert. And he did so in his 11th labor or task. Now let's go back to that. So Heracles, if you guys have ever seen the Disney movie Hercules, is one and the same. He was kind of the titular hero of Greek mythology. So he was born of the gods, but he was separated, you know, for protection, because the gods, you know, were jealous, were spiteful, and Heracles was Zeus's progeny, but was not a progeny of Hera, Zeus's wife, because Zeus was, you know, quite an infidelous god. And so, you know, when we have power, sometimes we don't always use it in a rightful way. And Zeus did that, but you know, so many stories and characters and archetypes that we have now wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Zeus, you know, kind of being uninhibited and not holding himself as accountable when it came to his marriage. And so we have to thank him for this, and we also like have to think about the ramifications of that. When we step outside of what we're supposed to, there are punishments, you know, and just like Heracles had to kind of be living proof because no one could actually punish Zeus. He was a god of the gods, right? But Heracles kind of had to live out his fate in a way. It kind of felt like he was the receptor of Zeus's punishment. So the story goes, Heracles was eventually found out by Hera, Zeus's committed wife. And she didn't like the fact that he had a son, a very strong, formidable son, kind of walking the earth and, very strong, kind of undefeatable in a lot of ways. And so she didn't like it. And so she gave him all of these labors. And I'm going to look over some parts of the story and take us into more of the parts of the story that have to do with the eclipse. So please forgive me, but I encourage you to actually read all about Heracles to really get the whole thing. And if you're looking for a book recommendation to do this, Mythos by Stephen Fry is amazing. He breaks it down in a way that is really digestible, and it's not a lot of language or terms that are kind of old to us or they just don't resonate like in some of the other mythological texts. So I would highly recommend it. Heracles, is assigned 10 labors to kind of go about proving himself, and so he did something kind of unforgivable in a way, and he would have never have done it consciously. And so the 10 labors are him rectifying his mistake that was kind of started by the gods' inner workings and Hera. So Hera kind of started this journey for him. Of course, Heracles had to fall into the trap, so to speak, for it to actually set into motion to where it was his thing. But the 10 labors are him rectifying his mistake. And I'm not going to go into all of that, but basically, he goes throughout his entire journey, going labor by labor. He defeats the Hydra. He defeats the lion, which is his symbol. So we have links to Leo, right? And fire energy. He defeats he has like story with the bull, the Stymphalian birds, all of these different things. He goes to the Amazons, he has this really cool adventure trail. And what's so interesting is that he's serving this king this whole time that's giving him these actual commands. And so Hera isn't actually telling him what he's needing to be doing. He's answering a mortal king. And so when he gets to the end of the 10th task, that was supposed to be all of his labors, he returns back to this king, and the king feels like he had help along the way. And some of these tasks, the gods would intervene. If you think about Harry Potter, kind of getting help from other sources, whether it be Hermione or Dobby or even Dumbledore, there are these interweaving helpers that kind of come through on Heracles' journey, because he's given these impossible tasks, impossible for any mortal to do, and he's not outright asking for the help, but it just kind of happens for him. He attracts it because I think he has the attention of the gods, and they want him to succeed in this, right? And so, but it's all about proving that his worth and kind of getting some retribution, that's what all this is about. And so it's very punishing, and it takes a long, long time. He has to travel through different countries and places and solve all these mysteries and use prophecy to help guide him and all these things. And so it's very, very interesting. But what happens is, which has everything to do with this event, is Heracles gets back to the king after his 10th task, and he should be done, right? He's done all the work. He's completed his labors, and he's like, okay, now can I have my namesake back? Can I have this thing on my rap sheet go away? Can I make this? I've paid the penalty for it. And the king is like, no, you've had outside help. And so what he does is he assigns him 2 more tasks, which encompasses the number 12. And 12 is such a huge number in astrology. We have 12 signs, but this is happening at the 12th degree of Sagittarius. And Sagittarius being linked to the world and kind of travel, expansiveness, means that this energy is more accessible to everyone out there in some ways. Because like Zeus being the name of Jupiter, who's attached to Sagittarius, he was able to transform into different animals. He was able to move throughout the world. When you're living in the sky, things are a lot more accessible to you. You can kind of get to places easier. And that's why, in particular, this zodiac sign is all about getting to those places, seeing what's out there. Discovery is a huge theme for Sagittarius. But what we're looking at is 12 as a completion. 12 in astrology means that we have moved through all the signs and that there is maybe a new activation ready for us to take on, right? So if you go through 1 through 12, Aries through Pisces, then you kind of get like this reset. And so there's this new opportunity, a new sense of identity emerging, or at least a new task. I almost think of like the first house as if you're a soldier that's just waiting for a command, you receive what you're supposed to do when you're working with first house stuff or the first energy, right? And so it doesn't feel very personal yet until we get a little more time with it. It's not really our identity so much, but it is just what we're supposed to do. Very, very simple and straightforward. And so that's kind of encompassing this. So, but what's interesting is that this is not the 12th task, the 12th and final, which I'd encourage you guys to look into that. But this is the 11th task. When we are looking at Draco the Dragon, this is more tied to the 11th labor of Hercules than anything else. There's even a story of Athena throwing up the dragon into the sky, and throwing the dragon into the sky is metaphor, of course, but if you believe in mythology, it can be very real. And back in the Titanomachy, which I hope I'm saying that right, but that was when Zeus and the Olympians were battling for Mount Olympus, or the power of being the gods, the ruling deities over the Titans, which were a more primordial rulership, which Zeus and everyone with him came from. So there are a few stories with dragons, but we are focusing on the one tied to Heracles, because Heracles, if you look at him in the sky, is literally his foot is standing on the dragon's head, Draco. And so it feels like it has everything to do with Heracles' journey, and the biggest story where he encountered a dragon other than the Hydra was this story. So the 11th labor, Heracles thought he was done, and now he is sent off to do 2 more tasks. The first being to retrieve the golden apples of the Hesperides. The Hesperides were sisters, 3 sisters that were in this kind of pristine garden, a garden that no one really knew how to access. It was very well hidden. And there was this tree, this tree that produces these golden apples. They're very, very desirable. We don't necessarily know what they do, but there's a lot of similarities, and there's a lot you can compare to the tree of life. Having these apples, these fruits of knowledge, guarded. It's hard to access that place, right? Because it's magical, it's biblical, all these things, and so it's very sacred. There's that kind of imagery comes up in a lot of different religions and spiritual teachings, and so in mythology, we can see how one thing can be applied to many things. And so it's more about the themes, it's more about what happens as opposed to that being the only instance. So, keep your mind open and see what connects to what. That's basically what this is about. But the task was to go and retrieve the apples for this king. We don't know what their use was, we don't know what their purpose was, but just that they were very desirable. They were golden, obviously. And so eventually he spends a lot of time first trying to find the place. He meets with like kind of an old man of the sea type, that gives him this riddle or this prophecy. There's a lot of that in the stories of Greek myth, where you run into somebody that gives you these undefined directions, because anyone's journey or story is not to be told what to do, right? You're supposed to learn it, to find it on your own, through your own making, even if you are not good with riddles or logic or solving things, which it wasn't Heracles' first language. He was more brute strength and more about doing and physicality, as opposed to someone like Perses. So what happens is he ends up getting led to Prometheus. Prometheus, getting punished on a mountainside with an eagle on this loop, this kind of sci-fi like loop, right? Where he is getting his liver eaten by an eagle every day, or in some places it says a vulture. And so he's in this punishment for giving fire to humanity. And so he needs Prometheus. Prometheus helps him identify what his next step is. And Heracles frees Prometheus from his chains and his punishment, which was the first person to ever, I think, attempt to, and who knows how long that time had been. And so on the way to these things, you can see Heracles is this really honorable person, because he's also helping towns defeat monsters, to release people from punishment. There's a lot of imagery of he's a very good example of a hero, in every definition, and a hero that does make mistakes. So what he ends up doing is he ends up meeting with Atlas. Now, Prometheus sends him in that direction, so to speak. So Atlas is holding the sky up on his back. He's cursed with this punishment. Again, Heracles finding people that are are also in this kind of punishment, at least on this labor in particular, which is interesting because this is a new form of punishment for Heracles. Now, he thought he was done, but he has more to do. And so when he meets up with Atlas, Atlas actually knows how to get into the garden. He's familiar with these sisters, the Hesperides. So there are 3 sisters guarding this sacred tree that holds this fruit. And so his task is to retrieve the fruit. And Atlas, or at least Prometheus, he learns that there is a dragon also coiled around the tree, which is where Draco comes in. And so it's very snake-like. It doesn't have wings necessarily, but it's more serpentine. And so when he eventually learns all of this, and then Atlas allows him access to the garden, Heracles has to hold up the world for a second to relieve Atlas of the duty, so then he can actually retrieve the apples, because Heracles tried and failed to retrieve the apples, because the Hesperides are the 3 sisters around the tree, and they're kind of toying with him, and they're invisible, and so they're tricking him, and so he's unable to get the apples, even though he already killed the dragon. And so the dragon isn't really the hard part of it all. Heracles does that very easily. He's proven his strength time and time again, and obstacles, aren't really obstacles to him at this point. But when it comes to sorcery, when it comes to magic, when it comes to information, all that stuff is a little harder for him, because he leads with force. And so you see Atlas actually helps him because he's familiar with the Hesperides. And so Atlas retrieves the apples for Heracles in return for Heracles holding up the sky, the world, on his back for just a little bit. And so when he comes back, Atlas really likes the relief of not having to be in that position of punishment anymore after all this time. And so he tries to kind of weasel out of taking back the world from Heracles, in return for the apples or something. But Heracles, luckily, is sharp enough to notice when someone is trying to be cunning. Doesn't necessarily know where they're going, but he gets those senses, those instincts that to not trust or to do something. And so Atlas wasn't a bad person, perhaps a very respectable part of Greek mythology for his strength. But Heracles understands what's happening, and he makes sure that Atlas does take back the world, and so Heracles can move on and finish these labors and get on with his life. And so that happens. But let's kind of hone into the story, or the garden itself. So you have these three sisters, right? And we're going to talk about the themes of this too, because they have everything to do with this eclipse. So thank you for following along still. I know this is going to be a long one, and I've been wanting to do this for a while, but we see three sisters a lot in Greek mythology. And we see it you got the Moirai, who are the future. And so they are the fates, They are the ones that are determining our purpose. They are kind of those three sisters that are just spinning a web. They're weaving, And so it's almost like if you were, if your life was a spider web or something, it would just keep going out and out and out and out and out. And they're kind of in control of that, right? But there's three. And then we see the Horai, which are, the sisters in control of time, And so what we have here, I wrote this down because they're very confusing. There's a lot of these three sisters. So let me see what I wrote down here. Okay, so we have the Moirai, or the Fates, okay? And those are the ones that are also in charge of cutting your cord when your time is up. And then we also have the Gray sisters, or the Gray. They were sisters to the Gorgons, which were like Medusa and her two sisters. And so the Gray are the ones, if you ever saw that movie Hercules, the Disney one, they were the ones with the one eye, and they were actually combined with the Fates to Disney just kind of lumped them together. And so they're actually separate sets. The Fates are actually a little more easy to work with and a lot more outwardly beautiful, whereas the Gray were they're more evil or malefic looking, and they kind of have that takeaway too. Perseus runs into these in his travels. And then we also have the Graces, which are festivities, and so we see all of these groups of three sisters, and now we have the Hesperides. And so there is this kind of theme of what does the three sisters really mean? What does that implicate? Why do they show up so much in mythology and even in tarot? Look at that, in the three sisters here. So there's a heavy association to Gemini. Through my work, I've found that not only is it because Gemini rules multiplicity, which Gemini is a sign that can multiply. What I mean by that is it can take something that is real, coming from Taurus, the second sign, and it can touch it. And when it touches it, it can have it over here, it can hold it perhaps and produce something similar, like the exact same thing. It can replicate it with its other hand, or it can shift it, it can change it, it can move it into something else. And so, because Gemini is duality, and so Taurus is like the oneness, it's a fixed sign, and then we have the first mutable energy right after, which is Gemini, and that allows us to multiply. And so we can move away from that which we know, because we've been able to either learn it and learn how to replicate it, or to be able to take it somewhere else, to take us somewhere else, literally, metaphorically. And so there's that kind of implication. And so all of these pairs of sisters have different duties in what they're supposed to do. Like one sister cuts the cord, one, holds the middle, one begins, there's that kind of theme. So they all have a different responsibility, but they all come together and kind of work as one unit, which I find is very interesting. And so in the Hesperides, they don't really have an objective, those three sisters, other than to guard and protect this sacred fruit of the tree, which they even have the help of a dragon, and they even have the help of illusion, because people can't find the garden to begin with. And so it's very well protected. And so this is kind of like what intellect does. And the reason why I'm talking about Gemini energy is because we are still on the eclipse axis of Sagittarius Gemini. And so we're working with both, and technically the North Node is in Gemini, which is getting the main focus. It's where we are heading towards, right? Your North Node, your North Star. Even though this one is happening with the South Node in Sagittarius, we're going to find that both characters, both themes show up because they're working together. And so perhaps we could see that if Gemini is the energy that rules the sisters, and the deception, you think about Mercury, Gemini energy being trickery, right? Not knowing how to find somewhere, getting you lost, getting you off track, which they did this to Heracles. It's hard to figure out. You have to know people, you have to communicate, you have to connect. And so that's why Heracles had to talk to these other deities along the way and to find out. And it actually took him, I believe, 3 people, instances in particular, which is very funny. But he had the old man, he had Prometheus, and he had Atlas. Those are the 3 that come to mind when I recount the story. And so he had to actually go through 3 different energies to get to the 3 in the garden. And again, the dragon wasn't really the hard thing for him, because the dragon was real. He was able to use arrows, his poison arrows, to defeat it, which again connects us to Sagittarius. And so if we see ourselves as in the position of Heracles through this myth, through this story, you are the sun, you are the person standing in that place in the astrology. And so we see Gemini as the sisters, maybe what we have to work with to move through this story, this Greek myth that is now coming up for us in 2021 for some reason. So you're going to see themes of sisters, you're going to see themes of access and needing to access a secret place, or needing to know people to get into like a party or an event. And so it's about kind of getting close to energy that maybe you're not very keen on getting close to, but they have something worth obtaining, like these golden apples, right? And so what happens though is we have to be aware of the dragon, of the danger. The daughters themselves weren't particularly dangerous. They were more mischievous. They were hidden. They were kind of toying with Heracles, but they weren't actually putting him in danger. It was the dragon's presence that was the most dangerous part of all this. And perhaps Heracles along the way running into these other figures. So that's just kind of the themes for what this scene kind of went like. And so imagine yourself as interacting with the Gemini energy, the multiplicity. And so it's not easy to define who is what, and it may be kind of confusing, but stand in your power, stand in the solar of this Sagittarius eclipse and the lunar. So you are united over here. And so that means that perhaps you have emotions that are propelling you on this journey, right? We have the moon involved in this eclipse. And so it's not just about the discovery, the sun, but it's also the moon. You're being forced to do something. You're being forced to rectify a mistake, something that's happened recently in the past. I know from my own experience, I am literally trying to recover from what happened at the last eclipse, which has been an interesting ride. And so think about that, and think about how Heracles was given extra tasks than what he was initially supposed to have. And he didn't ask for the outside help. It came, it intervened. And so there was extra punishments. And so don't think about it as like being a victim or the punishing sense of all this, but think about like the journeys and what they're teaching you. And even if something outright doesn't look like you're going to learn anything from it. It's just another task to appease this king, or to appease this cosmic scale of balancing yourself from, if you were way over here and now you're over here. Think about that it's still meant for you in some way, and try to find the purpose behind it, you know? And so Heracles freed a major god that was being punished along the way, and he also gave another one a break for a second, and he also slayed a dragon, you know? And so he did do a lot of things. Yeah. And the apples weren't really actually put to use, which I think is funny, because the apples represent teachings and knowledge, you know, and so it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put into practice that which you obtain. Perhaps you're not even obtaining it for yourself, right? Perhaps it's for someone else, someone else's pleasure or delight, it's for their entertainment, weirdly enough. But that's what it could be. And so try not to think of it as like you're doing all this not for a particular reason. There is reason behind it. It's more about the journey, the process along, and pushing yourself through these strenuous times where you thought it was done, where you thought everything was finished, and you're just like, oh, I have 2 more things to do, you know? And so don't give up. Like Heracles, embody that energy, embody that hero energy, and that every part of this is adding up to something major, right? You know, so we see that significance of the 12. So no energy is not a part of this journey for you, this eclipse moment, in whatever way it's happening for you. Of course, where it's showing up in your astrology is going to give you a better understanding as where it's happening, what those energies look like. But these tales, these mythic tales, give us overtones, give us something to understand, right? And so there are good deeds that can come along the way towards doing these things that you don't feel like you have to do or you're supposed to do. It feels more punishing than anything. But we don't become heroes. We don't become good by complaining and being victims. And so Heracles didn't. And so we can't either. We just have to accept that this is our reality and this is what we have to do at this time, you know? So lots there. But that's why mythology is so cool, you guys, is one, it relates so well to astrology. I mean, literally the heavens, the stars are named after Greek figures and stories. But to think about like these stories, whether you believe in them or not, have these archetypes, these themes that prevail every day. In our lives, and looking at especially these stars as new information. It's not something that I feel like a lot of people and I myself have worked with very intimately, but it seems to be opening up for me a lot more recently, of what Draco the Dragon would mean. Oh, we're dealing with an eclipse in Draco the Dragon. Okay, so scary stuff, danger afoot, you know, we're really gonna have to fight hard, you know, be the hero, be Heracles, but that doesn't mean that the dragon is the focus or what we're supposed to learn. It could just be one part of the journey, right? And so try not to think about it as just coming up against a foe, but like you're meeting a new side of yourself through every challenge. You're understanding if you could make it through, you know, what were the strategies that you took to make it through that moment? Did you speak your truth? All of these things. And so it's not really about what energy you're meeting with, but what is it activating within you, right? So think about that way. And just going back to this, since we feel like the sisters, or I feel like the sisters, being associated to that Gemini energy, which is going to be opposite where this eclipse is happening in Sagittarius. Think about yourself as standing in 12 degrees Sagittarius, where the dragon is. And so you're right up on it. Maybe you're scaring people a little bit. Maybe you're a little fierce, you know, and just think about you meeting with it, right? And what that has to do with everything. So there's another name for this star. It's called Rastaban. And so I believe it's the eye, or at least the head of Draco. And Draco is a very swirling serpent. And so we can feel like we kind of get caught up in a story or something that is kind of confusing or perplexing as to why we're doing it. But it's meant for us. You know, dragons are kind of everywhere in mythology and ancient cultures. And so, you know, think about the beast in you kind of coming up. And how you can kind of work with these energies. You can be a part of that scene. And maybe you don't see yourself as Heracles. Maybe you see yourself as Draco. Maybe you see yourself as the sisters or Atlas. You know, something in that realm. But the story itself should give us a greater understanding or gateway into what this eclipse is bringing up for us. So have some fun with it that way. I also want to share with you guys, this one actually didn't come up, but we can see those three sisters here, right? And there's many forms of three sisters in Greek mythology, not just the Hesperides. But we see them harvesting, you know, something good. Here it's more like pumpkins, maybe peaches or something. And so we see that fruit, you know, fruit being the feminine, being something sacred, being something that's protected, you know, like kind of that moon energy. And so what I was doing in my research, I got some cards that came to me and I think they're pretty cool. So I'm gonna show you guys. Let me take a sip of water here. It's been a while since I've done a long format video like this, or anything on my YouTube channel. It's been a while, but I'm really enjoying it. It's more of like a platform for the kind of esoteric stuff that, hey, if you're really interested in this, you can kind of go in there with me. So what I got 4 cards, and so we have here the 4 of Pentacles. So I don't necessarily want you guys to think about, you can look into the meaning of this. The meaning is a lot, but I also want you to see, what does the picture itself look like? So here we see a person, we see like the king, what's his name? Eurydice? That was giving Heracles these extra labors. And so he's holding maybe access, or, you know, that the thing that Heracles needs to move on, which is kind of like the award, the stamp of approval, his identity back, right? And so we see him not willingly giving it. You know, he's reluctant to hand that over to Heracles. And so he gives him 2 more tasks to complete. So we see that energy. But what I also see in this card is something similar to a tree. You see like a tall kind of figure made of earth. Pentacles are the earth nature in tarot, right? And so you see here this kind of coiling around it, kind of looks dragon-like, like Draco wrapped around the tree, and how he's holding the fruit. You know, he's protecting it. And so I think that's so interesting, right? And so this darkness, you know, shows that there's some fear when you approach her. You come across a dragon or a snake or something, you automatically, most people would try to avoid it instead of like having to face it. But in Heracles' journey in this myth, it shows us that we may have to do something that looks a little scary, you know, or a little daring of us to kind of put ourselves out there in order to obtain the permission or our identity back. And so we have to meet with this energy that doesn't budge easily, right? And so then what we also got is the 4 of Swords, which I think is really interesting because it kind of brings, Heracles has already done everything that he needs. So his kind of status, his fame has been solidified here and encapsulated by this kind of like hero, soldier, maybe that died in combat, something like that. And so there's already a mark that we've achieved in this time. And so there's some rest too, right? When you think about Prometheus, you know, kind of being punished and exiled, and, you know, how if you imagine the bird eating his liver all the time, how it would just be kind of sharp and like coming at him. And he can't move. You know, we see this stone here, right? And him just kind of praying, wishing. And Prometheus is prophetic. And so he knew at some point that there would be this person that came and freed him. And he knew more specifically that it would be this hero and everything. So he was just kind of waiting. And so what we do in those times when we're just waiting for something to happen or to change, we can still use those times efficiently, right? And so I think in Prometheus's case, he was able to work out ways to talk to Zeus after he was freed, which he immediately went up to Olympus, and they, reemerged in their friendship because it was just kind of, I don't know, stupid. Anyways, and so, but we also see Heracles really solidifying more of his honor and his place as a hero among the stars and among the gods, right? Even though he thought he was at the end where he was going to get that rest, he was not able to take it on. And if you guys are curious about the positions that these cards came in, I had the 4 of Pentacles in reverse, 4 of Swords in reverse, the 2 of Wands in reverse, and Justice in reverse. So everything was reversed, which is taking us into the past, right? If we're reversing our position, we're looking backwards. We're looking at history, at myth, at ourselves, in moments that have already transpired, and trying to either move away from them, to understand them, to work with them again because they have something that we need. So think about it that way. So 2 of Wands is, I feel like, where Atlas comes in. We see the mountains in the background, which there are actually a mountain chain called Atlas, and I believe it has something to do with him in the place where he was holding up the heavens, which was at like a very high point, where it, like, if you imagine like the sky meeting, something like, what's the one in the Himalayas? Everest. It's like so high up, it's almost touching the sky itself, like the stars. And so Heracles had to go and meet Atlas. And Atlas, look, we're literally holding the world in this person's hand, not on the back, but it's very, very close, right? And the wands indicate a duty, a responsibility, something that is very physical, and it can feel like a lot of work. We think heat, we think fire, we think sweat. And so he was punished, just like Prometheus, for an infinite amount of time to do this. And he had to kind of reclaim his role after getting a break, perhaps from Heracles for a second, right? And so I just think that's so interesting, because these cards came out, literally, I hadn't done that much research, and I was just like, show me what this eclipse is about. And these things came out, and I just love it. Everything's connected, you guys. And so 2 of Wands is, again, denying us access to move on, looking at something that we have to pay attention to. It's like our attention gets diverted. If it's upright, usually in a way that's positive for us, in a way that's encouraging us to move forward. But Heracles, you remember, in this task, he didn't know that he would have more to do. And so this is almost like forcing him to be curious about a part of the world or a journey that he wasn't curious about before, or didn't know was coming to him. So in a way, and then we got Justice in reverse. And so I don't know about you guys, but like, it very much feels unjustified for Heracles. And I think what's interesting is that it's the people that don't take the victim state that then get camaraderie, that then get support and understanding from outside parties in the world itself. And so in Heracles' position, he was just a very respectful and integrous kind of person, very much like king, like or good king energy, or like someone that had a touch of destiny on them, and that really used that power or that whatever in a very kind of respectable and honored fashion, someone with a lot of morals and integrity. And so it does feel unjustified for him to kind of get these tasks and to have to do more. And so with Justice in reverse, it can feel like that too. And you're just like, oh, I already thought I paid my dues. I already thought I did the thing. Wasn't I done? And so around this time, it can feel like there's still something else to flesh out. That maybe there's the other person's side. There is a duty that you have to just completely 100% finish and wrap up before you can fully move on. And so it feels like there's this pausing, around this eclipse, which I think is so interesting with Sagittarius energy. You think about it just being the accelerator and just moving as fast without any really obstacles. You think of like easy movement, swift movement with Sagittarius. But here we can see that is not the case around this eclipse. And so what we see here is a turning back. For you guys, it may be to the last eclipse that just happened recently. It may be a lot farther than that. But 4 reversals out of 4 cards is pretty major. It doesn't happen very often in my work. And I think it's just so interesting because he does meet like this king energy, right? We see that in the first card and the last card, that crown. And how power isn't always used wisely or justly. And so, but if we fall into the victim state and we've been like, why is this happening to me? If Heracles had done that, if Heracles had felt like, if he had displayed that this was an unfair thing for him, perhaps things would have been a lot harder, but his honorable fortitude led him farther on this journey to find out what all this was, and he did a lot of good along the way. And so think about that. Think about, even if this is a time where you're just like, I really don't want to do this, or I don't feel like I have to do this, whatever is happening for you, any struggles, any challenges, any punishments, even if it's a lot more closely related to the story, where you have to work with the dragon or energy that you're uncomfortable with. You're like, I don't know how to trust it, doesn't feel right. Understand that you are strong, you are a hero, and that those things that happen along the way can be really great instances. Think about all the good that he did along the way. And so that he does find purpose through living the task and the experience, not just about what he's supposed to do, but it's about what happens along the way. So think about it that way, you guys. Eclipses are a journey, man. And so we're in this together in some weird way. It's a very interesting time to be in COVID and not knowing really what's next. But this is very much encapsulating what has happened, and perhaps being able to move away from it by first kind of paying our dues or doing a few more things to fully release us into the stratosphere, where hopefully towards the end of Sagittarius season, we will feel more inclined to kind of go with less inhibition, go with less obstacles. So thank you guys. If you have watched this entire video, thank you. I really appreciate you. If you've gotten little snippets here and there, think about this. Mythology is so big, right? And so even going into one labor has all of these other characters that we run into, but then you can think about the character Heracles himself and everything that he had to do. And so it depends on how much you want to scale up or down. It's like zoom in, zoom out, right? And so that's what's so interesting, in that the symbology of the 3 sisters, the tree of life, the knowledge of good and evil, and the apples, the dragons, all of these different elements are likely to come up around this time. And so what's interesting is not to know how they're going to come up, but to just see the connections of like these stories that are so long past, still breathing new life into the world. Isn't that like so magical? I just think it's really, really cool and invigorating to know that we are a part of all these stories, and vice versa. So lots to divulge and lots to digest around the eclipses. Have a good eclipse. I'm going to cut this off before we hit the hour mark. And if you want to follow this page for more content, I'm going to be thinking of, I already have another one planned that's kind of off a different topic, but really interesting, I found in my work through astrology and tarot. If you are curious about my Instagram platform, it is Phase the Future, same name. I've just kind of rebranded a little bit. And there's more short form content on there, as well as my TikTok of the same name. And so if you feel inclined to see some more snippets of information, to work with me, or to get a little more astrology into your day-to-day, that's where you can find it. So thanks guys for tuning in and subscribing, and let me know how your eclipse goes. Let me know what you notice about all this stuff. All right, bye.